So far, we've created a single data set, DS items, that stores information regarding our items data. Let's examine what happened when we created this using the Data Sources window. Expand the Properties folder in your Solution Explorer. Double-click on Settings. Here, you'll see the settings that we set earlier for our Photos directory. You'll also see a new setting for Inventory Connection String. This actually stores the connection string that we can use to access our database. Close this window. The next thing you'll notice is that DS Items XSD has been added along with its relevant code behind files. If you double-click on DS Items, this will launch another tool that Visual Studio has for data access. This is called the DataSet Designer. When we selected the item table as our data source, Visual Studio 2008 automatically generated the schema file using schema inference. Visual Studio automatically picked up the underlying column structure from SQL Server and fed it into an XSD file, which we then can examine visually in the DataSet Designer. This file is actually represented as an XML file that Visual Studio can interpret and feed into this visual format. Visual Studio breaks out a data table into two sections. The first part shows all the columns or the data schema that you have available for your data table. Below that, you have any type of methods or activities that you can take on that particular set of data. By default, you can see that it generated a fill and a get data select for us. By looking at the Properties window on the right-hand side, we can see that the command text was automatically generated for us, where it selects item data from our table using a command text property. You can also see that the command type is text. We could also choose to use a stored procedure or table direct to directly work with our tables to create direct methods for accessing our table. We also have a choice of execution mode. By default, a fill method will return a reader, meaning a result set of data. We could also choose non-query. Non-query means return no data. This is very useful for doing a delete. Scalar allows you to return a single item, for example, the primary key of an insert. We'll be using Scalar later in this chapter. Let's leave this as reader. We can also use the Toolbox to work with our DataSet Designer. Select Toolbox. You can see that the Toolbox automatically understands that we're working with the DataSet Designer. Therefore, it gives us objects that we can drag onto our design surface and create either new table adapters, queries, data tables, or relations. We also have the ability to use a Microsoft Access-like tool called the Query Designer. We can access that by right-clicking on the fill method and selecting Configure. In the advanced options, you can see that an insert, update, and delete statement was automatically generated for us based on the select statement. This way, we don't actually have to worry about creating these methods independently when we're dealing with our item data. We can use the Query Builder button to launch the Query Builder tool. For those of you that use Microsoft Access, you'll probably find this tool quite familiar. This allows us to add different tables by right-clicking on the table area and adding other tables to our data set, or we can actually view the results of our query by selecting the Execute Query button. And now we can actually see the data that's returned from our database. We can also preview the select statement or the SQL query that's actually going to be implemented, as well as work with the columns in a visual format and manipulate them directly using the visual window, applying filters or sorts. We can also type directly into the code window. Let's add an order by clause. Type in order space by, then we'll use item.itemID as a way we want to order our data. Select Execute Query to test the execution, and then select OK to save your changes. The Query Builder automatically does background compilation to determine if there's any errors in your query. If there are, you'll be notified and you can make the adjustments directly within your Query Builder window. Select Next. The next window allows you to generate methods for your table adapter. By default, you'll have fill and get data. We'll go ahead and keep the defaults for now and click Finish.